After an hour's walk, we arrived at a water ditch with clear water. The villagers drank eagerly and filled our containers, while my 3 daughters gathered wild vegetables with the village aunts. Back at camp, everyone busied themselves preparing a feast from the wild boars and chicken I had hunted. We boiled the offal and pig's head with spices and turned the rest of the pork into jerky. The grateful villagers gifted me grain, cloth shoes, and dried vegetables in return, which I accepted with a smile, knowing that relationships thrive on mutual giving. My daughter Wanyi was thrilled by our abundance. I patted her head and told them to pack up so we could rest before continuing our journey that night. As we returned to the official road at dusk, the village chief kindly directed a group of desperate refugees to the mountain water source we had found. News spread, and many followed our trail. We traveled safely for 2 more days, nearing the border of Liangzhou. On the 3rd morning, under a scorching sun, we paused in a flat area to rest. Inside our donkey cart, my daughters preferred cool sour plum soup over food, since they had been snacking. Thanks to traveling at night and having plenty of water, everyone in our group was exhausted but in good spirits. Suddenly, a group of refugees came rushing back down the road in panic. The village chief stopped an old man and learned the terrible news that troops were forcibly conscripting soldiers at the border, blocking refugees from leaving Liangzhou. Panic erupted in our camp, and women began to wail. I quickly secured the donkey cart and told my daughters to stay safely inside. The village chief ordered us to retreat to a safe place to figure out a plan. Following a suggestion from his son, we turned onto a rugged side path at a fork in the road. Despite the thorns scratching at us, we pushed deep into the mountains, desperate to find a hidden spot to rest and plan our next move. After walking for about half an hour, we came across an abandoned and lifeless village nestled against the mountains. A dried-up riverbed lay at the entrance, crossed by an old stone bridge with a tablet that read Qinghe Village. The houses made of wood and earth were crumbling, and the entire area was filled with a deathly silence. The village chief halted our group at the dusty threshing floor, deciding we should rest there and discuss our next move since the place was secluded and deserted. I parked our donkey cart in the shade, and my 3 daughters stepped out looking pale from the bumpy ride. I told them not to wander off before heading over to join the village chief, the clan elders, and the other family heads. The official road was blocked by troops conscripting men, so we had to find another way to avoid having our young men taken. We looked at the map, but a massive mountain range blocked our path to the neighboring province. Crossing it with all our luggage, food, and livestock seemed impossible. I suggested sending out scouts to look for hidden valleys or paths, and the village chief agreed. He decided we would rest for 2 hours first, and then split into 2 groups to search along the riverbed. After a good rest, the village chief assigned the tasks. He ordered Yi Jiang to lead a group downstream, while I was told to take Yi Shan, Yi Zhu, Yi Chun, and a few others to search upstream. We all grabbed our weapons and set off along the dry path. Yi Shan noticed old tire tracks on the ground, giving us hope that this road led somewhere. After walking for about half an hour through the desolate scenery, Yi Zhu excitedly spotted a hidden path leading to a cave entrance on the mountainside. The opening was small, but a cool breeze was blowing out of it. This meant the cave was connected to the other side, and the presence of old wheel tracks on the ground proved that people had used it before. Everyone was overjoyed at the prospect of finding a way through the mountain range. I noticed the stone walls had been man-made long ago. Since it was dark inside, we gathered firewood and lit torches. With my broadsword drawn, I led the way into the dimly lit, gravel-covered cave, and the others followed closely behind. As we ventured deeper into the man-made cave, the scorching heat outside gave way to a cool and pleasant chill. Yi Chun and his younger brother Yi Xia felt anxious about the eerie atmosphere, but I reassured them that the drop in temperature was perfectly natural. However, I warned everyone to watch their steps carefully, as damp caves are common habitats for snakes. As we moved forward, we noticed messy footprints on the ground, which put us all on high alert. Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed through the darkness, and a swarm of screeching bats flew over our heads, giving everyone a temporary fright. After calming down, we continued down the winding tunnel. Yishan noted that a cave this deep must have been purposefully dug to reach the other side of the mountain range, and I agreed that it was highly likely. Soon, the clear sound of dripping water led us to a small, crystal-clear puddle seeping from the rock wall. Thirsty and excited, Yichun rushed forward to drink. Just then, I caught the distinct chilling sound of a snake flicking its tongue. I quickly grabbed Yichun's arm and pulled him back with a loud warning. Looking up toward the ceiling, we discovered a massive python, as thick as an adult's arm, coiled above us and staring down with cold eyes. Panic broke out, and Yexia screamed in terror, turning around to flee. The sudden movement startled the python, causing it to slide down the rock wall and charge straight at our group. Reacting instantly, I drew my repeating crossbow and fired. One of my arrows struck the python directly in the eye. Yi Shan and Yi Ju immediately joined in, unleashing a relentless barrage of arrows from their own repeating crossbows. The python thrashed wildly in pain but was quickly riddled with arrows, finally collapsing motionless to the ground. Realizing Yi Xia had run off, I instructed Yi Chun to go back, find his terrified brother, and send him safely back to the village while the rest of us waited. As we examined the dead serpent, Yi Shan excitedly noted how plump it was, while Yi Zhu worried about more snakes. I advised caution and had us inspect the area. We discovered a nest of 7 or 8 large snake eggs on a rock ledge, which we decided to collect and bring back to the village elders to see if they were edible. Yishan also checked the python's mouth and confirmed it was non-poisonous. We set the snake aside, planning to carry it back later for a fresh batch of snake soup once Yi Chun returned to rejoin our exploration. After a short wait, Ye Chun returned and awkwardly shared that his terrified brother Ye Xia had been too shaken to walk back to the village alone. The group had a good laugh, but I told everyone to drop the teasing to save the man's pride. We then pushed forward through the labyrinthine cave. Thankfully, we did not encounter any more snakes, and everyone's nerves gradually eased. After walking for another half hour, a faint glimmer of light appeared ahead, and we quickened our pace toward it. As we stepped out of the cave, we found ourselves halfway up a mountain. An overgrown, disused path wound down toward a completely deserted official road in the distance. I smiled and told the group that we had successfully reached the other side of the mountain range. With the refugees still stuck back in Liangzhou, this meant our way forward was clear. Excited by the breakthrough, we started our return journey with incredibly light steps. When we reached the spot where we left the python, Ye Shan hoisted the heavy creature onto his shoulder. At the cave entrance, we found Ye Xia still waiting out of embarrassment. The guys teased him again, and the sight of the giant snake sent him hiding in terror behind his brother. Half an hour later, we arrived back at Qinghe village. The villagers spotted us from afar and cheered. As we reached the threshing floor, the sight of the massive snake caused a huge stir. Children hid in fear, while the braver adults gathered around in awe. My 3 daughters kept a safe distance, watching with a mix of curiosity and dread. The village chief quickly pushed through the crowd to ask if we had found a way out. I confirmed that we had found a cave leading directly through the mountains and had killed the snake inside. Relief washed over everyone, and the village chief laughed heartily, declaring that we no longer had to live in fear. As the men retold the story of our adventure, the crowd burst into laughter over Yexia's mishap, prompting him to run off to hide. The village chief then ordered a celebration with snake soup and sent a few men downstream to recall Yezhong's scouting party. The women quickly set up the cooking pots, and the men began skinning the snake, while the elders confirmed the snake eggs were safe to eat. Back at my donkey cart, my daughters finally approached me, and Wanyi praised my bravery. I smiled, reminding her it was a team effort. Nearby, the other children proudly boasted about their own father's heroism, filling the camp with warmth and laughter. After a full day of traveling and scouting, I was completely exhausted. The campsite was noisy with children playing and adults talking, so I spread out a straw mat in a quiet spot to sleep. When we were woken up, the delicious snake soup was ready. Since my group had made the biggest contribution in killing the python, we received the largest share. Yejong's scouting team also returned weary but relieved to hear our good news. My daughters, Wanqing, Wanru, and Wanyi, brought a steaming pot of soup to our donkey cart. They were excited to try snake meat for the first time. I retrieved large white steamed buns and a bowl of vegetables from my spatial storage, and we enjoyed a delicious, satisfying meal together. Once everyone finished eating, the village chief ordered us to pack up quickly so we could cross the mountains. Led by a few of us, the entire village set off in a grand procession under the scorching afternoon sun. When we reached the tunnel entrance, a blast of cool air made everyone shiver. I warned the village chief that the sudden temperature drop could cause people to catch a cold. He immediately ordered everyone to put on an outer coat. The cool tunnel refreshed our heat-weary minds, and we stopped to rest and gather water at the internal puddle. I suggested to the village chief that we wait until dark to exit, as the tunnel mouth was close to the border garrison. He agreed, and everyone settled down to sleep. While I rested in the carriage, my daughters joined the other village kids to gather firewood. Later, Wanqing gently woke me to wipe my face with a damp cloth. I handed her some ingredients from my storage for dinner and fell back asleep. When I woke up again, my daughters had prepared a wonderful dinner of yam and pork porridge, along with stir-fried lettuce. The tunnel was brightly lit by a row of bonfires, as other families also utilized the water source to cook hot meals. After dinner, the camp became a busy workshop, as everyone prepared dry rations like pancakes and fried noodles for the journey ahead. Late at night, we loaded our bags onto the carts. As we approached the tunnel exit, the village chief gravely ordered us to extinguish all torches to avoid detection by the nearby guards. Plunged into darkness, we used the faint moonlight to guide our way down the mountain. A few strong men led the procession with machetes, quietly cutting through the tall, withered weeds to clear a path for our escape. We trekked through the night and finally made it down the mountain onto the official road. To avoid the government soldiers, the village chief urged everyone to hurry. We traveled until dawn and stopped to rest in a deserted village. I noticed that Ningzhou looked just as desolate and drought-stricken as Liangzhou. While feeding our donkey, I spotted a figure flashing past the village entrance. I quietly alerted the village chief, who sent me, his son Yehi, and a few others to investigate. We sneaked through a side path and found a disheveled young man rummaging through a house. We followed him to a dry thicket outside the village where we overheard him weeping and apologizing to his weak parents because he could not find food. Someone in our group accidentally snapped a branch, alerting the young man. He rushed out in terror, but I recognized him as the wealthy merchant's son from the sandstorm incident. He explained that government soldiers had robbed them and forcibly conscripted all their guards. The young man knelt and begged us to save his dying parents. Sensing that helping these wealthy individuals might benefit our village later, I pulled him up and asked for his story. He introduced himself as Chen Wensong, traveling with his parents Chen Hai and Madam Huang back to their ancestral home in Jingzhou. They had escaped the conscription conflict, but his parents were now dying from infected wounds and fever. When I asked what he could give us in return, he desperately agreed to any condition. I told him that the village chief and elders had to make the final decision. We carried his unconscious parents back to our camp. The village chief listened to the situation and agreed to let our village doctor treat them. Chen Wensong wept with gratitude, thanking us repeatedly as we settled his family in a shady spot to await the doctor. Our village doctor examined Chen Wensong's parents and found that their wounds were heavily infected. He explained that they needed their fevers to break to be completely out of danger. He advised feeding them thin porridge before administering their medicine. Hearing this, I brought over a pot of water and some of our leftover food. My 3 daughters carefully carried 3 bowls of our yam and lean meat porridge to them. Chen Wensong fed his weak parents before eagerly eating his own share. His father, Chen He, was deeply grateful and promised to repay us handsomely once we arrived at their ancestral home in Jingzhou. The village chief gathered the villagers together to discuss what to do with the Chen family. He reasoned that since they were people of status, Saving them now could greatly benefit our village in the future. The elders agreed with this logic. Despite some initial reluctance from a few households, the village pooled together over 100 jin of grain and a bucket of water. Chen Wensung accepted the supplies with tears in his eyes. He used to look down on such meager rations, but after experiencing true hunger, he realized they were more precious than gold. The village chief told him to rest up because we would continue our journey that night. When I returned to our donkey cart, my daughters remarked on how drastically the wealthy family had changed. I sighed and reminded them that life is unpredictable. The girls insisted that I sleep inside the carriage since they were already well rested. While I slept, the three sisters sat at the front of the cart, quietly sewing a new set of clothes to surprise me. Meanwhile, Chen Wensong struggled to brew the medicine, accidentally blistering his hands in the process. He carefully fed the bitter brew to his mother and father, feeling a wave of relief as they both managed to swallow it. Exhausted from days of heavy stress, he finally fell asleep by their side. As evening approached, the campsite bustled with preparations for the night march. Chen Wensong woke up and sincerely asked the village chief for work. Though he was told to just focus on his parents, he insisted on helping. The village chief ultimately put him in charge of organizing our food and water storage for the journey. As night fell, our convoy slowly departed from the deserted village and headed toward Jingzhou. Chen Wensong's helpful attitude had earned my daughter's respect, and the village chief had kindly provided 2 cart spaces for his recovering parents. However, once we stepped back onto the official road, I noticed a massive influx of refugees. This was strange, as the border was supposed to be blocked. To find out what was happening, I handed the leash of my donkey cart over to Yi Shan and jogged to the front of the line. The village chief was already questioning a refugee. He turned to me with a grim face and explained that Liangzhou had fallen to the Tartars. The government soldiers had abandoned their conscription posts after capturing enough men, leaving the mountain paths open. The fleeing refugees were now completely out of food and water. The village chief warned me to guard our rear, as desperate people would soon start stealing supplies. I quickly returned to the back, drew my blood-stained broadsword, and led my donkey on foot. I told my daughters to stay safely inside the carriage. As we quickened our pace, the road grew more hazardous. We passed weeping crowds and fresh corpses, and we even witnessed a group of refugees violently looting another family's carts. To protect ourselves, our village quickly tightened its formation. We placed the supplies, women, and children in the center, while the armed men formed a defensive wall. Seeing our sharp machetes, the looters chose to stay away, allowing us to pass safely. Our relief was short-lived, however, as a large group of emaciated refugees blocked the road ahead. They sat directly in our path, refusing to move. When the village chief asked them to let us through, their leader hoarsely demanded food, threatening to block us indefinitely. I gripped my broadsword and prepared to step forward, but the village chief held me back to try and negotiate. Chen Wensong also joined us, trying to reason with the desperate man and offering words of hope, which made the leader hesitate. Just as both sides reached a tense stalemate, the rapid, terrifying sound of chaotic hoofbeats suddenly echoed from the distance, signaling a brand new danger heading straight for us. The road erupted into utter chaos as a fierce group of Tartar cavalry rushed toward us like a whirlwind. The surrounding refugees panicked and scattered in all directions. Our village chief kept his composure and loudly ordered us to stand our ground and prepare for battle. The armed men of Yi family village acted swiftly, immediately forming a defensive human wall to shield the elderly, the women, and the children. I instantly unleashed my strength ability to its absolute limit, tensing my muscles. I quickly hauled several massive rocks to create a barricade to disrupt the enemy's charge. I stood at the very front of our line, facing the onslaught with my broadsword gripped tightly. Next to his parents' cart, Chen Wensong picked up a heavy log, trembling but determined to fight. I took a deep breath and roared to encourage everyone to protect our families. When the cavalry clashed against us, I charged forward like a tiger, channeling my supernatural power into my blade. I sliced an enemy's horse completely in two with a single blow. Before the fallen rider could react, I swiftly took his head. Nearby, Yi Shan and Yi Zhu fought fiercely alongside the other villagers, working in unison to unhorse the riders and finish them off. From behind the wagons, our crossbowmen unleashed a steady barrage of bolts, dropping multiple Tartars from their mounts. Even Chen Wensong managed to strike a Tartar with his log before a villager stepped in to push the enemy back. The battle grew incredibly bloody. The Tartars used their horses to aggressively flank our defenses, injuring several of our men. Seeing our villagers fall, I grew enraged and rampaged through the enemy ranks like a beast. I parried a heavy strike from a rider and kicked him away with enough force to end his life. Another Tartar tried to ambush me from behind, but I dodged fluidly and beheaded him. Immediately after, a rider swung a massive hammer weighing dozens of kilograms directly at me. The sheer impact made my arms go completely numb, but I gritted my teeth and blocked it. I then kicked his horse to the ground and swiftly ended his life, desperate to secure our survival. The fierce battle raged on as Ye Shan, Ye Zhu, and the other villagers fought desperately to defend our perimeter. Our repeating crossbowmen managed to take down several Tartars, but they also drew heavy enemy retaliation. Two of our brave crossbowmen were tragically struck down in the chaos. Near the carts, Chen Wensong was knocked to the ground by a strong kick while trying to shield his parents. Terrified for their son, Ye Hai and Madame Huang rushed to his side, but a villager stepped in just in time to slay the attacking Tartar. After a brutal struggle, the remaining Tartar cavalry finally broke and fled in terror. As the dust settled, a heavy silence fell over the bloody battlefield. The village chief tearfully tallied our losses, announcing that 8 of our villagers had sacrificed their lives to protect the convoy. Grief gripped the entire camp as families wept over their fallen loved ones. I immediately rushed back to check on my donkey cart. When I pulled back the curtain, my 3 daughters were huddled together, crying in terror. Seeing me drenched in blood, they initially screamed, but calmed down the moment they recognized my voice. They tried to throw their arms around me, but I stepped back. I told them not to come close because of the blood, and instructed them to stay inside the carriage so they wouldn't have to see the horrific scene outside. We then began the grim task of cleaning up the battlefield and collecting scattered weapons. The village doctor and the women worked quickly to treat the many wounded. The air was filled with immense sorrow and anger. One devastated mother even grabbed a knife and began frantically hacking at a dead Tartar to vent her rage over her son's death until the men gently held her back. Seeking a quiet, secluded spot under the cover of night, I pulled a bucket of water from my spatial storage. As I squatted down to scrub the sticky bloodstains off my skin, a sudden piercing pain shot directly through my back. Once my tense nerves relaxed, waves of pain washed over me. I realized I had been sliced by a Tartar's sharp blade during the battle, but I had been too focused on fighting to notice. After washing off the bloodstains, I returned to the carriage shirtless. My 3 daughters poked their heads out, relieved to see me alive. I pulled a bottle of strong distilled liquor and wound medicine from my spatial storage, asking Wan Qing to help apply them to my back. When the girls saw the gruesome finger-length wound, they burst into tears. I comforted them and had Wanru and Wanyi gently blow on the injury to ease the stinging, while Wan Qing carefully disinfected it with the liquor and applied the medicine. Soon after, Ye Yusheng and Li returned from clearing the battlefield. They grew anxious upon seeing my bandaged back, but I assured them it was just a minor stab wound. They shared that Yi Shan was unhurt, but several of our fellow villagers had perished. Li wept and cursed the ruthless Tartars, while Ye Yusheng wondered how the enemy had managed to penetrate this far into Ningzhou. I speculated that they might be a scouting party or a group of raiders looking to steal food. The village chief soon gathered everyone, urging us to move quickly because the Tartars might return. The uninjured villagers suppressed their grief and loaded the bodies of our fallen neighbors onto the vehicles, alongside the dead Tartars and a few captured enemy horses. Hearing that I was injured, the village chief rushed over to check on me, offering to fetch the doctor. I declined, explaining that my daughters had already treated me with my own supply of medicine. To help the rest of the wounded, I told the village chief I had a strong liquor that could disinfect injuries and prevent fatal infections. I reached into the carriage and retrieved a well-sealed earthenware jar of distilled spirits from my spatial storage. The village chief accepted the jar with immense gratitude, knowing this remedy could save many lives in our group. The village chief was initially skeptical when I handed him the jar, wondering how a simple spirit could prevent dangerous wound infections. I reassured him that this was a specially processed liquor far more potent than ordinary wine, and that using it to cleanse injuries would successfully keep inflammation at bay. Relieved, he took the pottery jar and hurried off to find the doctor. The doctor immediately understood its value and carefully wiped the wounds of our injured neighbors with the spirit. It stung terribly, but the brave villagers gritted their teeth and endured the pain to save their own lives. Soon after, Yeshen and Yezu returned from their duties and expressed deep worry over my injury. They urged me to be more cautious and avoid throwing myself into such dangerous situations. I calmly explained that if I had backed down at that critical moment, our entire village would have lost morale and perished. Yi Yusheng agreed completely, calling me the backbone of the community, and the Yangchun children looked at me with pure admiration. We regrouped our convoy and traveled through the grueling night until dawn. We finally halted at a flat, shaded area to rest and bury our 8 fallen clansmen. Led by an elder who understood feng shui, the men began digging graves while the grieving families wept uncontrollably over the bodies. The village chief gently persuaded the heartbroken relatives to let go so their loved ones could rest in peace. We wrapped the bodies in straw mats, and I used my tools to carve individual wooden tombstones for each of them. After the somber funeral, we dragged ourselves back to camp. Despite our immense exhaustion, we immediately began processing the 7 or 8 dead Tartar warhorses we had captured. I joined in, using my blade to swiftly peel off the valuable horse hides, which could later be used for tents or clothing. The men chopped the meat into pieces while the women sliced them thin and salted them to make durable jerky. However, the rich aroma of the horse meat soon drifted across the wasteland, attracting a large crowd of wandering refugees. Seeing the growing numbers gathering in the distance, the village chief warily shouted a warning, and we all grabbed our weapons, instantly freezing in high alert. The rich aroma of our horse meat attracted a large crowd of emaciated refugees. Seeing the greed in their eyes, the village chief warned them that this meat belonged to us, and reminded them that we had just slain a band of Tartars. The refugees hesitated, but their sheer numbers made them bold. A fierce, starving man stepped forward as their leader, demanding meat. When the village chief refused to back down, the man swung his stick and led a reckless charge against us. Our men instantly formed a defensive ring to protect the women, children, and supplies. Standing at the front, I calmly told everyone not to panic, noting that these desperate refugees were much weaker than Tartars or bandits. I ordered our crossbowmen to fire. A volley of bolts brought down the front rank of attackers. I leaped forward, kicked a stick out of one man's hand, and swiftly decapitated him to shatter their morale. As the chaotic melee erupted, the leader lunged at me. I sidestepped his strike and slashed his abdomen open. He staggered back, completely incapacitated, and I quickly slit his throat. Despite the losses, some refugees continued to resist fiercely. I charged directly into the horde, precisely cutting down anyone in my path. Suddenly, a familiar surge of heat rose from my dantian, signaling that my strength ability was about to advance. However, the heat dissipated just as quickly. I realized I needed the intense stimulation of more combat to break through. Without a second thought, I rampaged through the crowd, swinging my machete with incredible speed and force. I entered a state of hyper-focus where everything around me seemed to slow down, allowing me to spot every enemy flaw. I ignored the fact that my back wound had reopened and kept fighting. Soon, the heat in my dantian returned as a fiery torrent, rapidly rejuvenating my tired muscles. Inspired by my actions, the villagers fought back with soaring morale, the women throwing rocks and the children staying tightly grouped. I concentrated all my energy and unleashed a powerful blade of energy from my machete, sweeping through the front line of refugees. With that final strike, the heat reached its peak, and a peanut-sized supernatural crystal core successfully formed in my dantian. My strength ability had officially upgraded. I felt completely reborn. My senses became incredibly sharp, and both my speed and physical strength multiplied. Terrified by this display of overwhelming power, the remaining refugees shrunk back in absolute horror, and not a single soul dared to step forward again. Holding my machete, I stood in the center of the ravaged battlefield and coldly dared anyone else to step forward. Terrified, the refugees broke and fled until none were left. This battle successfully stabilized my strength ability at the second level, providing an extra layer of security for our survival. The village chief checked on everyone, and luckily, our group only suffered a few minor injuries. I advised him to keep our guard up, so we had the bodies of the defeated refugees placed in front of our camp as a grim deterrent. My 3 daughters ran over to check on me, no longer paralyzed by the sight of death. Wanqing noticed my back wound had reopened, so the 4 of us returned to the donkey cart to change my dressing. Once the camp was secure, everyone resumed processing the horse meat. After a busy morning, the village chief distributed the jerky, even giving a considerable share to Chen Wensong's family. The leftover bones were boiled into a large pot of soup. I returned to my cart with a pot of broth, where my daughters were eagerly waiting for me so we could eat together. I retrieved dry food and a plate of cold wild vegetables from my spatial storage. While the horse meat smelled wonderful, it proved to be incredibly tough and hard to chew. After our meal, the village chief gathered the household heads to allocate the plump war horses and valuables seized from the Tartars. We decided to prioritize the families of our 8 deceased villagers, letting them share the mounts to speed up our progress. The village chief promised that once we reached a stable city, we would sell the horses and divide the money fairly. We also collected the stolen silver, copper coins, and bead strings found on the enemy, leaving them with the village chief for safekeeping. With the distribution finished, the exhausted camp finally fell into a deep sleep. Over the next few days, we pushed forward along our route. Occasionally, starving refugees would try to rob our supplies, but our armed men quickly formed a protective ring around the vulnerable. Standing as a one-man army at the perimeter, I used my upgraded strength to easily cut down or severely injure anyone who dared to close in, successfully driving the attackers back every time. As our convoy continued its journey, we passed 2 county towns. We arrived at the gates full of hope, only to find them tightly shut against refugees. Heavily armed soldiers stood guard, ruthlessly massacring anyone who tried to force their way in. Our water supplies were running dangerously low, but when we approached lakes and rivers, we found them heavily restricted. Government runners with whips aggressively drove us away. We had no choice but to bypass the towns along remote paths, enduring severe thirst with cracked, peeling lips. Along the way, we heard terrifying news from other refugees. Liangzhou Prefecture had completely fallen to the Tartars, who were massacring villagers and looting food. Worse, they were amassing troops for a massive offensive toward Ningzhou. Meanwhile, the northern drought worsened, sending a massive tide of refugees toward the south and the capital. Instead of resisting the Tartars effectively, the imperial court treated refugees harshly, arresting them at intersections to use as army cannon fodder. To make matters worse, the south was plagued by devastating floods that left countless people homeless. Faced with danger in every direction, our village chief grew deeply troubled and called a meeting to discuss our next move. The villagers argued back and forth, unable to reach a consensus. Knowing very little about this dynasty, my own backup plan was to flee into the deep mountains until the chaos subsided. At that moment, Chen Hai stepped forward. He and his wife had recovered well and were now accepted as part of our group. He suggested heading to his hometown in Jingzhou, which was the fiefdom of the benevolent Prince Jian. The village chief worried that Jingzhou was flooded and might reject us, but Chen Hai explained that the flood damage there was minor and the situation remained stable. He added that he had old acquaintances who could help us secure food and shelter. A local hunter and another villager supported the idea, arguing that we desperately needed a clear destination. The village chief then turned to me for my opinion. I pondered for a moment and agreed that with the north-facing drought and the south-facing floods, Jingzhou was our best choice. Seeing the collective hope of the group, the village chief made the final decision to head south toward Jingzhou. He urged everyone to stay united for the difficult journey ahead. With our minds made up, we regrouped and continued our march. Fortunately, thanks to our careful treatment, everyone's wounds had successfully scabbed over without any infections. As dawn broke, the massive city walls of Ningzhou finally came into view. The area outside was densely packed with a sea of desperate refugees. I told my 3 daughters to stay hidden inside the carriage while our convoy halted in an open area, pulling the carts into a protective ring. The village chief wanted to sneak into the prefecture city to replenish our rapidly dwindling supplies, but we lacked the required travel permits. I pointed out that local residents were still being allowed through after strict checks. I suggested we find a well-connected intermediary to help us slip inside. While Yi Hai prepared his writing materials to record the exact items each household needed, a dark-faced local man named Iron Army approached us. He introduced himself as a middleman who could secure entry spots by bribing the guards, charging 1 tael of silver per person. Despite the villagers complaining about the high price, the village chief decided it was necessary. He put Yehai and me in charge of the task because we could read, and he promised to guard my children while I was gone. Before we finalized our plans, I asked Iron Army if we could purchase water inside the city. He explained that all local water sources were strictly rationed for residents, meaning refugees could not buy any. However, he noted that if we traveled further south along the river, past government-controlled territory, we might find accessible water. I relayed this crucial information to the village chief, who decided we would push south right after buying our other essentials. Chen Hai then approached us, asking to join the excursion so he could pawn an ancestral jade pendant for cash, promising not to burden the village funds. The village chief agreed and selected Chen Wensong to accompany us. He then handed Yihei 30 taels of silver from the village pool to purchase bulk items like salt, straw sandals, and hats. As we prepared 3 large ox carts for the trip, my daughters gripped my clothes, weeping out of fear for my safety. I smiled gently and comforted them, promising to bring back delicious treats. The village chief paid Iron Army 3 taels of silver for our entry. The middleman grinned, pocketed the money, and told Ye Hai, Chen Wensong, and me to grab our household registration documents and follow him closely to the gates. Chen Hai quickly handed his hidden household registration book and an ancestral jade pendant to his son, Chen Wensong, instructing him to pawn the jade sparingly for supplies. Yi Hai and I also retrieved our household documents. With our 3 empty ox carts, we closely followed our guide, Iron Army, toward the heavily guarded city gates. At the gate, we witnessed a terrifying scene. The guards brutally beat a desperate refugee who tried to sneak in without a travel permit, making it very clear that outsiders were unwelcome. The tension was palpable as the soldiers roughly inspected people, even openly groping women. I worriedly asked Iron Army if he could truly get us inside without incident. He confidently assured me to stick close and let him do the talking. When it was our turn, Iron Army approached a fierce-looking guard named Zhang. Zhang initially refused us because we lacked travel permits, but Iron Army quickly slipped him a small packet of silver as a bribe. He then pointed to our household registration documents, guaranteeing that we were just honest men buying supplies. Zhang accepted the bribe and reluctantly let us through, warning us not to cause any trouble. After I fronted 20 coins to cover Chen Wensong's entrance fee, we finally crossed into Ningzhou City. To our surprise, the city was not bustling. The streets were mostly deserted, and many shops were closed. Iron Army pointed out a nearby pawn shop and told us to hurry as he needed to wait around to escort us back out safely. Chen Wensong nervously entered the dim shop and successfully pawned his jade pendant for a good price. Relieved, he handed me 5 taels of silver to buy half coarse and half refined grain for his family. Yihai handed me 15 taels of the village's silver to buy our grain, suggesting we split up to save time, while he and Chen Wensong bought the other supplies. I pulled my ox cart toward a grain store and found a long line of people waiting to buy food under the watchful eyes of burly guards. After waiting over half an hour, I finally reached the front and discovered that the price of coarse grain had skyrocketed fivefold. Without haggling, I spent all the silver I had been given on the requested grain, secured a receipt from the shopkeeper, and loaded my ox cart to the brim. Using my enhanced second-level senses, I quickly noticed two tattered men whispering and tracking my movements. To deal with them safely, I deliberately led them into a quiet alley and toward an abandoned house. As they eagerly prepared to steal my ox and grain, I ambushed them. I kicked the first thief away, causing him to spit blood, and swiftly broke the second thief's wrist when he lunged with a dagger. After a brief fruitless interrogation, I ended both of their lives without mercy. I searched their bodies but only found a few coins. To prevent any further theft, I stored the grain from the cart into my spatial storage. I then went on a massive buying spree to fill my space. In a general store, I flashed a heavy bag of silver to change the owner's skeptical attitude and bought out all his dried goods, pickled vegetables, jars, buckets, and water pouches. I later hid in secluded spots to transfer the items into my spatial storage so I could continue shopping. I bought massive amounts of steamed buns, mantou, pan-fried wontons, salt, clothes, pastries, and even a full vendor's bucket of tofu pudding. Once finished, I left the bulk grain out on the cart alongside some visible supplies and rushed back to the city gate. Yihai and Chen Wensong were relieved to see me. I blamed the long lines for my delay and explained that the price of coarse grain had risen fivefold. Yihai took the store receipt with a pained expression. Our guide, Iron Army, escorted us smoothly past the gate checks before leaving to find his next target. As we walked back toward our main camp, a group of hostile refugees spotted our fully loaded carts. They threatened a starving woman, forcing her to approach us. She knelt in front of me and sobbed, begging for food to save her child. Knowing that giving in would invite chaos, I stayed completely unmoved and told her to get out of the way. She collapsed in despair. Seeing her fail, the hostile refugees used her plight to shout that we lack compassion. They quickly surrounded us, intending to take our grain by force. Yehai, Chen Wensong, and I stood back to back, tightening our grips on our weapons. Just as a violent clash became inevitable, Ye Shan, Ye Zhu, and nearly 30 of our armed villagers suddenly rushed to our side with their broadswords drawn, successfully forcing the thugs to think twice. The aggressive refugees froze when they saw Ye Shan and our armed villagers arrive with their broadswords drawn. Their fierce expressions quickly turned to terror. The tall refugee leader tried to act calm, claiming they only wanted us to show compassion for the child. Yi Shan sneered, making it clear that trying to rob us meant courting death. Seeing the tide turn, the woman with the child quietly backed away. I stepped forward, grabbed the leader by his shirt with one hand, and lifted him effortlessly into the air. Terrified by my strength, the other refugees shrunk back. I told him he was lucky we were at the city gate, then threw him 3 meters away. He crashed heavily and spat blood. The rest of the thugs panicked and fled. Yi Shan asked if my strength had increased again, but I just smiled it off. We quickly escorted our ox carts back to the main camp. Unbeknownst to us, the guards at the city gate had watched the whole thing and decided we were too dangerous to provoke. Back at the camp, the village chief ordered an immediate departure to find a safer place to distribute the supplies. I reassured my worried father, Ye Yusheng, and my 3 daughters before getting back on the road. We headed south, circling the city walls for half an hour until we reached a river. Unfortunately, the water level was pitifully low, and government soldiers heavily patrolled the banks. As we pushed further south, the river dried up completely, plunging the villagers into deep worry. The village chief gave a loud, encouraging speech to lift our spirits, reminding everyone that we could survive if we stayed united. We finally stopped in a shady area, completely exhausted from traveling all night and spending the day buying supplies. My daughters looked listless from the intense heat inside the carriage. I climbed inside, retrieved some cool sour plum soup from my spatial storage, and poured it into a water gourd for them. The refreshing drink quickly energized them, and they came out to sit on a straw mat in the shade. After feeding the donkey and drinking some water, I leaned against a tree to rest. My mind remained on edge to keep watch, though the village chief exempted Yihai, Chen Wensong, and me from patrol duty so we could recover. As the sun set, I woke up and joined my 3 daughters. Wanqing handed me a bowl of mixed grain porridge she had prepared. I brought it over to our donkey cart, then surprised the girls by pulling a full bucket of tofu pudding from my spatial storage. They were absolutely thrilled. While I preferred it sweet with sugar, they all wanted theirs savory with salt. We sat together and happily wolfed down our food. Afterward, the village chief and Yehai distributed the newly purchased city supplies and explained the prices. When the villagers learned that food prices had skyrocketed 5-fold, they erupted in shock and desperation, but they ultimately had to accept it. Once everyone paid and gathered their items, night fell, and we set off on the road once more. The official road was packed with emaciated, weak refugees who looked like moving zombies. The path was horrific. Nearby trees were completely stripped of their bark for food, and rotting corpses lined the road, attracting vultures. My daughters covered their noses and hid inside the carriage to block the terrible stench. Some starving refugees cast greedy glances at our abundant supplies, while others simply followed closely behind us for safety. Soon, a massive crowd of desperate people was tailing our convoy. The village chief worried that we would be overwhelmed if they rioted, so he ordered us to place all the children and the injured into the carts and quicken our pace. I remained on high alert at the very rear of the convoy, tightly gripping my weapon alongside Yi Shan and Yi Zhu to form a solid defensive line. My third uncle, Ye Yusheng, took over driving my donkey cart so I could focus entirely on guarding our retreat, while Wanqing looked out anxiously and told me to be careful. Our entire village worked as one, using our bodies to create a protective barrier around the vulnerable. We rapidly accelerated our pace. Although the desperate refugees tried their best to keep up, they were far too weak from days of starvation. Since we had livestock to pull our carts and possessed much more energy from being well-fed, the distance between our convoy and the trailing crowd quickly began to widen. Once the refugees disappeared into the distance, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. I took the reins of the donkey cart back from my third uncle, Ye Yusheng, and returned to the rear. The night temperature dropped quickly, causing many villagers to catch a cold. Fortunately, we had obtained plenty of medicinal herbs from the mountain bandits' lair, which the village chief distributed. Worried about my daughter's frail health, I ordered Wanqing, Wanru, and Wanyi to stay inside the carriage with extra coats. As we moved forward, the road became a nightmare. Countless starved refugees lay dead, and the nauseating stench of decomposition filled the air. Wanqing complained about the awful smell, and I could only hope a plague wouldn't break out. In this utter despair, we witnessed horrified parents trading their children with other families to escape starvation through cannibalism. The heartbreaking cries of children echoed through the night. Wanyi asked why parents were carrying a little girl into the woods. To protect her innocence, I simply told her they were looking for food. The entire village witnessed these trades, but we were all hanging by a thread and lacked the strength to meddle in others' business. We finally found a rest spot at dawn. Suffocated by the stench all night, no one had an appetite. I pulled some sour plums from my spatial storage and shared them with Ye Shan and Ye Zhu's families to whet their appetite and quench their thirst. After unloading my donkey, I led it to a secluded spot to secretly feed it water, hay, and a large cabbage from my space. Back at camp, my daughters started a fire to cook porridge. Yi Yusheng painedly warned me to preserve our precious water, but I told him I could manage. As the aroma of porridge drifted out, the nearby village children watched longingly. I instructed Wanqing to share some with them. Wanqing quietly asked me if our hidden treasure had enough food and water for the trip. I smiled and assured her we had enough to last for years, which deeply relieved her. She scooped the porridge for the grateful children, who eagerly thanked her and promised to help her whenever she needed it. After our breakfast of porridge, eggs, and wild vegetables from my spatial storage, we hid the eggshells and rested. The journey became increasingly difficult over the next few days. The fading moon forced many refugees with night blindness to stop night travel, but our well-fed village convoy pushed forward. Soon, water reserves ran dangerously low, leaving the livestock weak and stubborn. When a brief patch of green appeared, hope was rekindled, but the landscape quickly turned barren again as the scorching sun rose. The village chief led us off the official road to a shaded spot to discuss our next move. Yehai spread out the map, pointing out the An River, which serves as the border between Ningzhou and Jingzhou. However, we were still too far to reach it without water. I studied the map and suggested heading toward a large mountain range nearby, where we would have a better chance of finding a water source. The village chief proposed sending a scout to save time, and everyone looked to me. I agreed to go. When Yishan offered to join me, I shook my head, insisting I would be much faster alone. My third uncle, Ye Yusheng, worried about the danger, but I assured him I would be fine and asked him to guard my daughters. Back at the donkey cart, my daughters also expressed their worry, but I quietly reminded them that traveling alone made it much easier for me to use my spatial storage. After giving them instructions, I grabbed my knife, put on my straw hat, and picked up 2 empty wooden buckets. Once I was out of the villagers' sight, I instantly stowed the heavy buckets into my space, feeling an incredible sense of freedom. I briefly wondered what it would be like to just disappear on my own, but I quickly dismissed the thought. Unlike my solitary past in the apocalypse, I now have family ties and a true sense of belonging with these people. I trekked toward the mountain range under a blazing, needle-like sun. The ground baked like a giant steamer, but traveling alone allowed me to move much faster. I freely retrieved cool water and fresh fruit from my spatial storage without having to hide from anyone. The surrounding landscape was completely desolate, filled with withered yellow weeds, listless trees, and the foul-smelling bones of dead animals. I used my sword to clear away the blocking branches and push forward. 2 hours later, I reached the foot of a majestic, rocky mountain. Finding no water there, I took a short rest in the shade to drink 3 bowls of light porridge with pickled vegetables. Seeking a better vantage point, I climbed step by step up a lower peak, carefully watching for any signs of green. Upon reaching the summit, I saw only a barren expanse of withered trees. Just as a wave of helplessness washed over me, I caught sight of something on the opposite mountain. Near a massive rock, a hidden cave entrance was partially covered by green vines. I quickly made my way down the rugged slope, ignoring a scraped knee from a slip. It took me half an hour to reach the entrance. When I pushed the vines aside with a stick, a cool breeze carrying a damp scent blew out, convincing me that water was hidden inside. I lit a torch and cautiously stepped into the quiet cave. I kept a close eye on my surroundings to guard against snakes. Suddenly, a distinct dripping sound echoed ahead. I turned a corner and discovered a small pond filled with crystal clear water fed by stalactites above. I scooped up a handful, and the cool, sweet water instantly refreshed my throat. After ensuring the area was completely safe, I reached into the pond and activated my supernatural power to draw the water directly into my spatial storage. I filled my space until the pond's water level dropped by half. Next, I took out all the buckets, water bags, and gourds I had bought in Ningzhou City, filling them one by one. I stored them back into my space and took a quick, refreshing shower. Afterward, I left the cave and spent another half hour scouting the complex valley to ensure I thoroughly checked the terrain before heading back to camp. During my scout through the mountains, I found a damp gully covered in lush green wild grass. I hoped to find another water source, but digging a deep pit revealed nothing. Realizing the area had dried up from the drought, I harvested the weeds to feed the donkeys later. I wanted to hunt some prey, but the mountains were completely desolate and filled with animal skeletons. With night falling and the moon providing very little light, I used my enhanced second-level senses to navigate the dark trail quickly without a torch. Before reaching the camp, I retrieved the two large wooden buckets filled with water and my carrying pole from my spatial storage. When Yi Shan spotted me on patrol, he happily yelled out to the camp. The sleeping villagers instantly woke up and rushed over in pure excitement. My three daughters ran up and grabbed my sleeves, relieved that I had returned safely. The village chief anxiously asked if I had found water. I nodded and pointed to the two full buckets, prompting the crowd to cheer in absolute relief. The village chief held my hand tightly and thanked me for saving the village from dying of thirst. After silencing the chaotic crowd, he had me explain the location and abundance of the water source in detail. Deeply grateful, the village chief declared that my heroic deeds would be recorded in the family genealogy for future generations, a choice the entire clan supported. I remained indifferent to the title and told them to drink their fill, feed the livestock, and prepare to follow me to the source tomorrow. The village chief told me to rest, so I led my daughters back to our donkey cart. When I asked if they had eaten, Wan Yi mentioned they had eaten dry steamed buns. I lamented that the mountains were empty of live animals, but they comforted me by reminding me we had plenty of food. Once inside the carriage, I pulled out 8 steaming hot meat buns from my spatial storage. The buns were so fresh out of the steamer that the girls accidentally scolded their fingers before putting them on a plate. We sat together, happily chewing the juicy meat buns, while joking about opening a bun shop in the future. The village chief distributed the water I brought back, allowing everyone and the livestock to drink their fill, since we could replenish it the next day. The next morning, I woke my 3 daughters. We washed up briefly, fed our donkey, and ate breakfast. The village chief then ordered me to lead the first batch of villagers into the mountains to fetch water, while the rest guarded the main camp, since the carts could not traverse the rugged mountain paths. I carried wooden buckets and water bags just like everyone else to avoid drawing suspicion. Under a blazing sun, I led the group along the rocky thorn-filled trail. Chen Wensong struggled on the difficult terrain and tripped, but he pushed through with determination. The villagers chatted about how precious water was, but by the time we reached the foot of the peak at noon, everyone was completely exhausted and panting heavily. I called for a rest and noticed Chen Wensong was pale and dizzy from the extreme heat. Realizing his water pouch was empty, I handed him mine to prevent heat stroke and gave him a sour plum from my pocket. I shared the rest of my sour plums with the other men to help quench their thirst and perk them up. After a 15-minute break and a quick meal of dry rations, everyone felt rejuvenated. I then led the group directly into the shaded valley, where the mountains blocked the scorching sun, making our steps noticeably lighter as we neared the hidden water source. Half an hour later, we arrived at the entrance of the karst cave. I instructed everyone to prepare torches since it was completely dark inside. As we reached the innermost pool, the clear sound of dripping water filled the air, throwing everyone into a state of pure excitement. We lit 3 large bonfires to illuminate the entire cavern, and the men drank their fill before completely filling our containers. The journey back proved to be incredibly slow and grueling because the heavy loads required us to rest frequently. Chen Wensong was left at the very back of the line. The heavy wooden buckets had chafed his raw shoulders, and the scorching sun made his sweat sting his wounds. Seeing his intense struggle, I took his buckets and easily added them to my own carrying pole. He was deeply moved and thanked me through his tears. By nightfall, we had only covered 2/3 of the distance. Because we were weighed down with water bags and buckets, we could not carry torches to navigate the rugged trail in the dark. Just as we halted to rest until morning, a row of lights appeared. It was a search party from our village coming to guide us back. We took turns carrying the heavy loads and finally reached the lively campsite late at night. My 3 daughters rushed to my side as the villagers enthusiastically relieved us of our buckets. The village chief thanked me warmly for my exhausting efforts. To ensure fairness, he ordered families who stayed behind to borrow water from today's carriers and return it tomorrow when the next batch went into the mountains. He announced that we would stay here for a couple of days to fully replenish our water supply. Back at my donkey cart, Chen He and Madame Huang brought their son over to express their immense gratitude for my protection. Chen He praised my character and asked to become friends, a gesture I happily accepted. Madame Huang warmly admired my three daughters, admitting she had always wished for a daughter of her own. At my prompting, Wan Qing, Wan Ru, and Wan Yi sweetly greeted the couple, bringing a joyful and affectionate end to our grueling day. The village chief exempted me from fetching water today so I could rest and guard the camp. I readily agreed. Back at our donkey cart, my three daughters sweetly massaged my aching shoulders, arms, and legs. Their care brought immense warmth to my heart. The next morning, the village chief led the remaining villagers into the mountains. I stayed behind, systematically setting up the patrol teams and securing our key locations against potential attacks. The camp fell into a peaceful, tranquil routine, with children playing, women mending clothes, and Madame Huang teaching my daughters embroidery. As I sat at the entrance keeping watch, Chen Hai walked over to chat. He praised me for keeping the village intact, noting that my commanding presence seemed more like that of a battle-hardened general than a farmer. To deflect his suspicion, I made up a story about an old martial arts master who taught me in my childhood. I then asked him about the political situation of the Great Han dynasty. Chen Hai sighed deeply, explaining that the entire imperial court was utterly corrupt, filled with fierce factional strife and restless regional princes. He predicted that widespread uprisings and rebellions would break out soon, plunging the world into absolute chaos. I lamented that ordinary people always suffer the most, whether a country prospers or falls, and expressed my humble wish to simply find a peaceful life in Jingzhou. Chen Hai was struck by my insights, but I awkwardly claimed I had merely heard those words from someone else. I explained that I had no desire for fame or power. In a chaotic world, even great heroes are often discarded once peace is achieved, unless one becomes the ruler of the world itself. Having survived the apocalypse, I only desired stability. Chen Hai was deeply surprised by my indifference to wealth and luxury. He argued that gaining status could help protect my family from enduring future hardships. I remained calm and unmoved by his advice. As an outsider, my only true goal was to keep my daughters safe. Chen Hai shook his head helplessly, completely baffled by how a simple farmer could possess such a profound, mysterious detachment from the vanity of the world. I asked Chen Hai if he could help us with our household registration once we arrived in Jingzhou. He readily agreed, promising to use all his connections to return the favor for saving his family. Satisfied that my efforts were not in vain, I returned to my carriage. When I parted the curtain, I found an indescribably loose piece of clothing. My three daughters, Wan Qing, Wan Ru, and Wan Yi, ran over expectantly, admitting they had sewn it together. To keep from discouraging them, I put it on despite the uneven stitches and sleeves of different lengths. I praised their first attempt, and Wan Qing blushed, taking the garment back to alter it. I advised them to seek embroidery guidance from Madame Huang, promising to wear the clothes every day once they were fixed. To cheer them up, I led them to a secluded spot away from the camp. I flipped my hand to reveal a piece of oilcloth from my spatial storage, along with 4 small roasted wild chickens and 4 bowls of sour plum soup. We ate heartily, and I finished off 2 more bowls of rice. We carefully rinsed our mouths to hide the smell of food before returning to the camp. At midnight, the second water-fetching team returned safely with an abundance of water, and the family who borrowed water from me yesterday returned my bucket. Because the fading moonlight made night travel impossible, the village chief announced we would shift to traveling during the day to leave Ningzhou quickly. After completing my assigned dawn patrol, we woke up early to pack. My daughters and I quietly ate bowls of tofu pudding inside the carriage before hitting the road. By broad daylight, we returned to the official road, keeping our armed men positioned to guard the perimeter. The road was heavily scattered with rotting corpses, emitting a terrible stench. Worried about a potential outbreak, I approached the village chief and suggested everyone wear cloth masks over their mouths and noses, boil all drinking water, and wash hands before eating. The village chief called over the village doctor, Yuxin, to evaluate the idea. The The doctor strongly approved of my prevention measures but noted our water was too limited for constant hand washing. Instead, he advised that everyone should use clean cloths to handle food to ensure the plague stayed out of our camp. The village chief explained the danger of a plague to the villagers, and everyone turned pale with fright. To protect ourselves, the women immediately began cutting fabric to make face masks. I returned to my donkey cart and gave some cotton from my spatial storage to my daughters, telling them to sew it between the layers of cloth for better safety. Wan Qing, Wanru, and Wanyi quickly finished making them. When I put on my mask, the awful stench of the corpses immediately lessened. I noticed that the bodies on the road mostly died of starvation or thirst, rather than disease, which made me breathe a slight sigh of relief. The village chief urged us to quicken our pace to pass the main refugee group and minimize our risk. We walked all morning under a scorching sun. The masks made it very difficult to breathe, but we pushed forward. As we continued south, the number of refugees on the road increased, and they stared greedily at our supply carts. Suddenly, we heard shouts of battle ahead. A large crowd of desperate refugees was violently robbing another convoy. Seeing our rich supplies, a massive group of crazed refugees turned and surged toward us like a tidal wave. The village chief loudly ordered everyone to form a defensive ring to protect the elderly, the women, and the children. I stepped to the front, drew my broadsword, and took command of our defenses. I sent Yishan to secure our rear, ordered Yizhu to stay close and guard the carts, and lined up our crossbowmen at the front for a flexible surprise attack. As the greedy crowd closed in, I yelled for our men to fire. A rapid rain of bolts dropped the front line of attackers. I tucked my repeating crossbow away, stepped forward, and kicked the foremost refugee so hard he flew 3 meters back, knocking down several others behind him. Brandishing my broadsword, I roared for our men to show no mercy and charged into the fray. Wherever I swung my blade, refugees fell screaming. My immense strength easily shattered their crude weapons. When I spotted a group trying to sneak around our flank, I alerted Yishan, who immediately intercepted them with his men. While the battle raged on, the village chief hoarsely encouraged the men to hold their positions, and the women huddled tightly with the children in the center, doing their absolute best to suppress their terror. While the village chief kept everyone in our convoy calm, the merchant convoy ahead gradually shifted toward us. They had been completely outnumbered by the refugees, but seeing our fierce defense gave them a glimmer of hope. The village chief did not stop them, knowing that joining forces would increase our chances of survival. I focused entirely on the battle, using my enhanced senses to track every threat. I swung my broadsword relentlessly, leaving a clear vacuum zone around me as the terrified refugees began to scatter. To maximize my impact, I put away my blade, grabbed the nearest attackers, and threw them like heavy sandbags directly into the densest parts of the crowd. My immense strength caused absolute chaos, allowing our villagers and the convoy guards to easily finish off the fallen rioters. Yi Zhu and his perimeter guards also stood firm, swiftly cutting down any stragglers who tried to slip through to reach our supplies. Exhausted, thirsty, and terrified by our brutal retaliation, the refugees finally broke and fled like frightened sheep. The village chief stopped our men from pursuing them, and a quick head count revealed that none of our villagers had died. Soon, a burly, bearded man named Chongwu strode over. He introduced himself as the leader of the Chongyuan escort agency from Ningzhou and thanked the village chief for our vital assistance. Realizing that traveling together would offer better protection, Chang Wu suggested we combine forces, especially since both of our groups were heading to Jingzhou. The village chief agreed, arranging for the escort agency to lead the way, while Yi family village brought up the rear. We treated our wounded and worked together to clean the battlefield, piling and burning the refugee corpses to prevent a plague. When I returned to my donkey cart covered in blood, my anxious daughters rushed over with washcloths. I assured them I was unhurt and sent them to help the village doctor with the wounded. I then climbed into the carriage to wash up and change into clean clothes. Once everything was reorganized, our combined procession slowly set off. The sight of our blood-stained weapons kept the roadside refugees at a distance. By evening, we halted at a flat area to rest. Although we camped a few meters apart due to a lingering lack of complete trust, we felt much safer. While my daughters gathered firewood with Aunt Lee, I led our donkey to the side to feed it. I noticed the escort staff casting wary, whispering glances in my direction, but I simply kept my guard up as we settled in for the night. Chang Wu walked over to my cart, cupped his hands, and praised my fighting skills. He asked if we could become friends, and if I had ever learned martial arts. I shook my head, claiming I was just naturally stronger than average. He called me a prodigy and looked forward to a friendly sparring match once we reached Jingzhou, which I gladly accepted. The village chief then joined us to ask about the situation in Ningzhou. Chang Wu sighed, explaining that the city was in chaos due to an impending Tartar attack, forcing his family to flee. However, he confirmed that Jingzhou remained relatively stable under Prince Jian's rule, which brought us great relief. After returning to my cart, my daughters prepared dinner. I retrieved dried meat and pickled cabbage from my spatial storage to improve our appetite, followed by some fresh fruit. The rest of the campsite was completely exhausted from traveling under the scorching sun, while wearing suffocating masks. That night, I leaned against the cart, watching the highly vigilant escort guards handle the night watch. My daughters slept peacefully inside, feeling completely secure. We woke up at dawn the next day, ate a quick breakfast of multigrain pancakes, and hit the road. With the Changyuan escort agency leading, and Yi family village bringing up the rear, our massive numbers successfully intimidated the scattered refugees along the way. Over the next few days, the trees gradually turned green, bringing hope back to everyone's eyes. When our combined team arrived a kilometer outside Chuaning County, we found the tall city gates tightly closed. A dense, numb crowd of starving refugees sat under the walls, surrounded by the cries of the dying. Heavy guards watched them from above with long spears. Chang Wu pulled his reins, noting that Chuaning County was our only path to Jingzhou and should not be closed. I agreed the situation was suspicious and suggested we halt while sending scouts ahead. Chang Wu sent 2 capable escorts galloping toward the gates. Before they could get close, the city wall guards shouted for them to halt, declaring the city closed to refugees. The escorts explained they were from the Changyuan escort agency delivering goods to Jingzhou, but the captain on the wall remained completely unmoved. He looked at our distant column and coldly shouted down that Chuaning County was a strict no-entry zone, and that even government officials would now need an official order to pass through. The escorts from the Changyuan escort agency tried to reason with the guards at the gate of Chuaning County. However, the soldiers on the wall immediately knocked their arrows, aiming cold tips right at them. Left with no choice, the escorts turned back to report to Chang Wu. He slapped his saddle in anger, worried about being delayed at such a critical stop. I had already noticed a small, weed-covered path a few miles to the left of the city gate where some refugees were winding their way south. I pointed it out to Chang Wu and reassured him. The village chief worried that the remote road might be dangerous, but I noted that since the refugees were safely using it, the path was clearly passable. Chang Wu agreed, and we decided to take the detour, rearranging our columns so the women and children walked safely in the middle. We traveled along the rugged, overgrown path for several days, steadily heading south. Slowly, the surrounding mountains and trees turned lush and green, and we even spotted birds flying overhead. Chang Wu, relying on his intimate knowledge of the terrain, reined in his horse and joyfully announced that the An River was just ahead. He declared that once we crossed it, we would finally be in Jingzhou. Half an hour later, the wide and misty An River appeared before us. The sight of abundant water lifted everyone's spirits. We found a flat riverbank, and Chang Wu ordered the group to camp. Our villagers excitedly rushed to the shore with buckets and water bags, while the village chief loudly reminded everyone to boil the river water before drinking it. I led my donkey to the water, and the parched animals drank in large gulps. My daughters went to gather firewood and dry reeds near the bank with the other adults and children. Soon bonfires were lit all along the shore, and pots of bubbling water were heating up. I tied our well-fed donkey to the carriage and retrieved cooking pots, rice, and dried vegetables from my spatial storage for my daughters, asking Wan Qing to make a refreshing porridge. Meanwhile, I joined Chang Wu and his escorts as they used their survival skills to forage in the damp mudflats. We successfully harvested a bounty of wild greens like purslane and lamb's quarters. I washed my share, brought it back to Wan Qing, and she added the chopped greens into the boiling porridge. Inside the carriage, I pulled out a plate of stir-fried lean pork with cabbage and some pickled vegetables from my space. My 3 daughters and I then sat together, comfortably enjoying our delicious and well-deserved meal. The women flocked to the riverbank with wooden basins to wash our accumulated dirty clothes. My daughters also brought our garments to the shallow water, and Wan Qing carefully scrubbed the stubborn stains and blood from my coarse jacket. After the children bathed safely in a secluded reed area, Chang Wu, his escorts, and the remaining men took turns washing up downstream. The cool river water completely dispelled the intense heat of the past few days. Back at the cart, my daughters took turns showering inside the vehicle and neatly organized the dried clothes. The night passed peacefully under the watchful eyes of our guards. At dawn, Chang Wu returned excitedly from the river with great news. He found 2 small fishing boats willing to ferry us across in groups. To save our funds, he negotiated a deal where we would help the boatmen repair their dilapidated vessels in exchange for a pound of grain per boatman. Everyone immediately divided the chores. Our men chopped wood to fix the cracks and loose oars on the boats, while the women organized the supplies. The boatman explained that a round trip across the calm current took about half an hour, with each boat holding a maximum of 10 people. I volunteered to lead the first group across to scout the south bank and secure a camping spot, while Chang Wu stayed behind to manage the remaining departures. My 3 daughters, Aunt Li, and several women and children boarded the first boat after handing over the grain payment. Standing at the stern with my broadsword, I warily scanned the river as we broke through the morning mist. Looking ahead, the south bank was covered in lush green trees, a beautiful contrast to the withered yellow landscape of the north. 15 minutes later, our boat landed smoothly on the south bank mudflats. I jumped ashore first and searched the dense forest. Finding the quiet woods completely safe, I returned to help the group set up a temporary camp with oilcloth sunshades. Soon, the second boat arrived with more men and supplies. The children happily carried baskets to harvest the abundant wild greens along the lush shore, ready to begin our new chapter in Jingzhou. As we moved our supplies into the new camp, I led a few men on patrol to keep a close eye on the children foraging for wild vegetables. Looking out at the river, I noticed many fish swimming freely. I returned to my donkey cart and grabbed a pre-made javelin from my spatial storage. To compensate for the light refraction in the water, I aimed slightly below and behind the fish's virtual image. I plunged the spear forward and successfully pulled out a large, thrashing fish. The children cheered excitedly at the sight. My daughters ran over, and I handed the fish to Wan Qing, promising them delicious fish soup for dinner. Soon Ye Shan, Ye Ju, and Chen Wensong joined us, eagerly sharpening sticks to try it themselves. When they repeatedly missed, I explained the physics of light refraction and advised them to lower their eyes close to the water's surface to reduce the angle. Chen Wensong quickly caught on and speared his first fish. Soon, many villagers and escort guards successfully caught fish, filling the camp with joyful shouts. By afternoon, the rest of our villagers and livestock were gradually ferried across. Unfortunately, one panicked donkey fell into the deep water and drowned because none of the northerners could swim well enough to save it. Many people also suffered from severe seasickness on their first boat ride. By the time Chang Wu arrived with the final group, evening was approaching. The village chief and Chang Wu decided we should rest for one night before traveling along the Jingzhou official road toward Qingxi town to replenish our essential supplies. My daughters sat under the donkey cart, admiring the lush green trees and clean air of Jingzhou. Seeing them so happy, I felt a deep sense of relief that we had escaped the northern famine and war. On a whim, I climbed into the carriage and retrieved some cured meat, dried mushrooms, and a block of tofu from my spatial storage. I thinly sliced the meat and mushrooms, mixing them into a pot of rice with soy sauce and salt to steam. Next, I skewered the remaining fish, seasoned them evenly, and grilled them to a golden brown over the open flames. Wanqing added the tofu slices and washed wild vegetables into our bubbling fish soup. Since our cart was parked downwind at the edge of the camp, the nearby families were too busy watching their own pots to notice our extra ingredients. Once everything was perfectly cooked, we loaded the savory mushroom rice, rich fish soup, and crispy grilled fish onto the cart. We sat together comfortably, enjoying our sumptuous meal while I carefully reminded my daughters to watch out for fish bones. After dinner, as night approached, I sneaked downstream away from the camp. Using my spatial superpower, I successfully captured over 50 fish from the river and stored them in my spatial storage, though they unfortunately died because the space cannot sustain living creatures. I took a quick shower and returned to camp, where the village chief assigned me to the second half of the night watch. During my shift, I noticed the night air was getting chilly. Thinking of my 3 daughters sleeping in the carriage, I stepped back to gently cover them with a thin blanket from my spatial storage. Afterward, I joined Ye Zhang and Ye He by the campfire at the camp entrance. They expressed their anxiety and hope about settling down in Jingzhou after fleeing the famine. I comforted them, saying that as long as we are alive, we can earn everything back by clearing wasteland or doing small business. At dawn, the camp became busy as everyone prepared to move. I quietly went back to the riverbank and collected 20 more fish using my superpower. Once the village chief and Chang Wu organized the group, placing the vulnerable in the middle and the able-bodied men on the outside, our long caravan departed along the official road toward Qingxi town. My daughters sat comfortably on the donkey cart while I walked alongside them. When my youngest daughter asked about the food in town, I smiled and gave them a box of pastries from my spatial storage to share. After traveling for about 2 hours, we finally heard the welcome sounds of roosters crowing and dogs barking. Soon the gray rooftops and a stone arch bridge of Qingxi town came into view. 2 armed soldiers stood guard at the entrance. Chang Wu handled the situation smoothly by presenting our travel permit and offering some loose silver. The soldiers softened their stance and allowed us in, directing us to the market on East Street for our supplies. Chang Wu then led our group forward, reminding everyone to stay together as we entered the town. Stepping into Qingxi town, I found a lively scene completely different from the desolate road we had traveled. The clean streets were lined with busy shops and filled with the aroma of food. When my youngest daughter pointed out a sugar-coated hawthorn vendor, I quickly reached into my pocket and handed the girls 3 strings I already had, telling them there was no need to buy more. The village chief announced that we had 1 hour to shop before meeting back at the town entrance. As we walked, I noticed a tense argument at a grain store where desperate refugees were protesting sky-high prices. Seeing how ridiculously expensive the grain was, I decided to skip it since my spatial storage was already well stocked. Instead, I focused on treats and fresh produce. I bought 4 sugar figures for the girls and myself, enjoying the sweet treat together. Further down the street, I spotted a melon vendor. After tasting a sweet, juicy sample, I bought his initial 2 baskets, which weighed 60 jin. Wanting more, I followed the vendor to his house at the end of town, where he had hundreds of pounds stored. Checking my remaining spatial capacity, I purchased 5 more baskets. Once we left, I secretly transferred most of the melons into my spatial storage, leaving 3 baskets in the cart for my daughters. I also picked up a basket of peaches, a basket of grapes, and some seasonings before we all enjoyed a refreshing bowl of noodles at a local shop. With our shopping done, I pulled the donkey cart back to the town entrance. While waiting for the others, I moved the remaining fruits and vegetables into my spatial storage. Ye Zhang soon arrived carrying bags of grain, explaining that his father was still gathering other supplies. Once the village chief confirmed everyone had returned, our caravan set off again along the official road toward Jingzhou. Chang Wu and his escorts led the way with high vigilance, while the village chief managed the middle of the long line. I brought up the rear with my donkey cart. My daughters were now drowsy after their exciting day. Holding the reins with one hand and keeping my other hand on my knife, I kept a sharp eye on the road and the surrounding woods as the sun began to set. As the sun set and the air cooled, Chang-Woo signaled for our caravan to stop at a flat, elevated area that was ideal for defense. While my daughters looked for stones to build a cooking stove, I headed into the nearby woods with Yi Shan, Yi Zhang, and Yi Ju to gather firewood. Yi Shan complained about the sky-high grain prices in town, and I explained that the massive influx of refugees allowed merchants to manipulate supply and demand. Our conversation soon turned to our next destination, Blackstone Pass. Ye Jiang warned that it was a narrow mountain pass historically plagued by mountain bandits. I reassured them that our large numbers and the escort agency would deter any easy targets, but I urged everyone to keep the women and children strictly in the middle of the formation tomorrow. Back at the campsite, my youngest daughter happily handed me a large piece of sweet melon she had saved for me. Soon Chang-Woo and the village chief approached to coordinate tomorrow's plan. Chang-Woo wanted to set off early to clear the dangerous pass before noon. I offered to bring up the rear with Yi Shan to handle any sudden threats, which brought a look of relief and approval to Chang-Woo's face. After finishing our meal, I approached Chen Hai to ask for more details about the pass, given his extensive history as a traveling merchant. He explained that Blackstone Pass was a narrow gorge with steep cliffs on both sides. While recent government garrisons had suppressed the major bandit groups, smaller bands of thieves still operated there. Crucially, he warned me about a hazardous scree slope near the exit where bandits frequently dropped heavy rocks to ambush travelers. I thanked him for this valuable intelligence, feeling much better prepared. Just as we finished talking, a sudden commotion erupted at the camp entrance. I ran over with Chen Hai to find Chang-Woo with his hand on his sword, confronting 3 ragged men who had just arrived. The leader, a man with a scarred face, was leading a malnourished horse carrying a young boy suffering from a severe fever. In a hoarse, desperate voice, the stranger begged us for food and water to save the dying child. The sudden arrival of the 3 strangers put the entire camp on high alert. The village chief and Chang-Woo decided to let them rest under a big tree just outside our camp until dawn. As they settled the sick boy down, their clumsy movements could not hide the fact that they were secretly scouting our grain carts and livestock. Standing at the back of the crowd, I kept my eyes fixed on them. I noticed that the soles of their tattered shoes were covered with fresh mountain moss and sharp pebbles, which were entirely different from the soil on the official road. They were clearly accustomed to walking in the mountains. Realizing the danger, I quietly activated my strength ability. My senses grew incredibly acute, and I gave Chang-Woo a warning look. He instantly understood and signaled his escorts to position themselves discreetly around the perimeter. While pretending to care for the boy, the scar-faced man secretly scanned the camp and tapped his fingers on the ground in a rhythmic signal. The short man beside him quietly untied a rope around his waist, revealing a hidden short blade. I immediately returned to the stove and whispered to Ye Shan and Ye Zhu that these men were mountain bandit spies. I instructed them to quietly inform the villagers and the escorts to ready their weapons and repeating crossbows without alerting the enemy. The camp remained calm on the surface, but everyone quickly prepared. Suddenly, the boy under the tree coughed violently. The scar-faced man patted his back while making a covert hand gesture toward Blackstone Pass. Chen Hai witnessed this, hurried over to me, and confirmed that the man was signaling accomplices. I warned him to stay alert, as a fight could break out at any second. I then approached Chang-Woo to tell him to prepare for immediate action. Right at that moment, a sharp, artificial owl cry echoed from the shadows outside. Realizing they were exposed, the short man drew his blade and lunged at a villager, shouting for an attack. Chang-Woo reacted instantly, drawing his sword to block the strike with a loud clang. He roared for the escorts to stand guard and for the young men to protect the women and children. Chaos erupted as sparks flew from the disturbed campfire. Thanks to our preparations, the villagers did not scatter. Instead, they retreated toward the center, under the direction of the village chief and Ye Jiang. I quickly pushed my 3 daughters into the middle of the crowd, telling them to stay close to Big Iron. Ye Wanqing bravely hugged her younger sisters behind our defense line as the battle began. I gripped my knife tightly and faced the charging scar-faced man. As our blades clashed, I channeled my strength ability into the hilt. The immense force sent his sword flying instantly. He glared at me in shock, shouting that his chieftain had 50 more bandits at Blackstone Pass ready to kill us all. I did not waste words. With lightning speed, I slashed his neck, and he collapsed lifelessly onto the ground. Meanwhile, an escort dealt with the sick boy. Outside the camp, the hidden bandits realized they were exposed and launched a full assault. Dozens of dark figures brandished weapons and rushed out of the woods. Yishan and the other young men immediately fired a volley from our repeating crossbows. The lead bandits screamed and fell, catching the rest off guard and forcing them to pause in fear. Our villagers quickly formed a protective human wall. The men stood at the front with broadswords, while the crossbowmen behind kept up a steady stream of arrows, safely shielding the women, children, and my 3 daughters in the center. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw their horse break free and bolt toward the pass to call for reinforcements. I quickly kicked a large piece of gravel, steering it with my strength ability. The stone shot out like a cannonball, shattering the horse's knee and sending it crashing to the ground. As the fighting intensified, several bandits managed to slip through our outer defense line toward the women. Yi He and Yi Zhu intercepted them fiercely, bringing them down before they could do any harm. I unleashed my strength ability to its fullest, leaping forward to cleave another bandit in 2. My terrifying display forced the remaining thieves to back off, shouting from a distance but fearing to charge me. Chang Wu and his escorts also held their side of the camp with lethal precision. The village chief kept his voice calm and powerful, preventing panic among the families. Suddenly, the heavy sound of hooves echoed in the dark. The main bandit force arrived, led by a burly, bald chieftain wielding a massive ghost-head knife. He roared at his men to swarm the camp. I immediately ordered everyone to contract our defense line around the grain carts and families. Our continuous crossbow fire rained down like locusts, temporarily halting their charge. I stood at the very edge of our perimeter, my blood-stained sword pointing directly at the bald chieftain. When he ordered another wave to attack, I stepped forward and cut down his men instantly, waiting for the final showdown. The battle grew fiercer as Chang Wu led his escorts into the fray, cutting down 2 bandits and carving a gap in their offensive. I fully activated my strength ability, keeping my grip like a rock. When 3 bandits rushed me, I met them head-on, cleaving one down with brute force while Yi Zhu swiftly finished off another as they tried to flee. Behind us, Ye Jiang and Ye He unleashed a steady rain of arrows from their repeating crossbows, temporarily halting the enemy advance. Terrified by our resistance, the bandits began to retreat, prompting the furious bald chieftain to roar commands and force them back into the fight. Seeing them swarm us again, I grabbed a heavy bandit corpse from the ground and flung it into the crowd, crushing several men and freezing the rest in their tracks. I then secretly palmed several smooth pebbles. Spotting a villager about to be ambushed, I flicked a pebble like a meteor, shattering the bandit's knee and allowing the villager to finish him. I continued firing pebbles into the enemy joints, crippling their wrists and knees, which sent their formation into utter chaos and allowed our villagers to launch a fierce counterattack. Meanwhile, the village chief kept the women and children calm and safely huddled behind the grain carts. When 2 bandits tried to flank our families, Ye He and Ye Jiang intercepted them immediately. The bald chieftain, desperate to turn the tide, killed a retreating deserter and charged straight at me with his massive ghost-headed saber. I met his charge head-on. Our weapons clashed with a loud clang and my immense strength sent his saber flying while forcing him back 3 steps. As he reeled, Chang Wu circled behind him and delivered a deep slash to his back, Seizing the opening, I drove my long sword straight through the chieftain's chest, killing him instantly. Seeing their leader fall, the bandits completely panicked and fled. We showed no mercy. Yishan Yajong, the escorts, and I pursued them, taking down the fleeing men until only a few managed to escape into the deep mountains. As the bloody battle concluded, an escort moved to finish off the few surviving, wounded bandits. I quickly stopped him, telling him to tie them up instead, as I kept a few alive for interrogation. The village chief quickly reassured everyone that the mountain bandits had been driven away and we were safe. While the uninjured villagers helped clean up the battlefield, the doctors and women began treating the wounded. Seeing that I was completely unharmed, my 3 daughters relaxed and joined the women to help. We looted the bodies of the dead bandits, handed the valuables over to the village chief, and then burned the corpses in a massive fire that turned the camp a fiery red. Despite just enduring a fierce battle, the camp was filled with excitement rather than solemnity. Looking at the silver and copper coins we recovered, the village chief eagerly pointed out that the remaining bandits who fled into the mountains were helpless. He suggested we immediately raid their stronghold to seize their food, money, and weapons before things became complicated. I wiped the blood from my hands, looked toward Blackstone Pass, and strongly agreed. Everyone's food supplies were running low, so this was a perfect opportunity to replenish our stock and gather weapons. Chang Wu grinned and added that this bandit group had robbed many passing caravans, meaning their base likely held gold, silver, and rare treasures. Yi Shan and the other villagers were completely thrilled by the prospect of securing food and wealth, quickly reaching a consensus. The village chief ordered us to interrogate the captured survivors separately to learn the route, their remaining numbers, and the location of their supplies. Under the painful interrogation, the terrified bandits quickly confessed everything. Their chieftain had deployed all their elite troops for the ambush, leaving only a few old, weak bandits and the few remnants who had just escaped to guard the base. Yejiang volunteered to take 2 men ahead to sneak through a narrow gap in the back mountain, take out the gate guards, and signal us. I then organized the main plan. I would lead 20 strong young men alongside Chang Wu through the main gate to take control of the stronghold. Yi Shan would lead a dozen men to the back mountain pass to block any retreat, while the remaining men stayed behind to guard our camp and protect the women and children. We checked our weapons and crossbows, waiting eagerly soon. Ye Jiang and his scouts slipped into the dark forest. Half an hour later, our main group arrived at the foot of the stronghold mountain. Hiding in the shadows, we saw torches by the main gate. 2 mountain bandits were dozing off against the entrance, completely unprepared. It was clear that the fleeing bandits had not returned to warn them, and the base was entirely at our mercy. Before long, I heard a soft thud as Yejong took down the 2 dozing guards without a sound. He pushed the village gate open and signaled that it was safe. I gave a low shout to charge and rushed inside, using my long sword to smash open a nearby hut door. Our strong young men poured in with knives and crossbows, quickly subduing the startled bandits. We dragged them out one by one and tied them up tightly in the central open space. Chang Wu went straight to the chieftain's house and kicked the door open. He found several large chests filled with gold jewelry, silver coins, and fine silk. Meanwhile, Yi Shan and his men successfully blocked the back mountain pass, capturing a few fleeing bandits before joining our search. Our biggest prize was the granary. It was packed with heavy bags of rice and wheat, along with cured meat, pickled vegetables, and jars of wine. The men happily loaded the food into burlap sacks. We also cleared out the armory, which held dozens of sharp longswords, short blades, and bows to replenish our weapon reserves. We thoroughly searched every corner of the stronghold, leaving nothing behind. By dawn, we had gathered a small mountain of grain, chests of treasure, and stacks of weapons. Yi Shan asked what we should do with the tied-up bandits. Chang Wu suggested turning them over to the government office, but I firmly refused. Doing so would expose the supplies we had just taken. I told them we had to kill them to protect our secret. Yi Zhu and Chang Wu agreed. After executing the bandits, I set their bodies on fire to erase the evidence. We loaded all the grain, weapons, and treasures onto 2 horse-drawn carriages and an ox cart we found in the stronghold. As we traveled back to our main camp, the young men laughed and chatted, entirely forgetting their exhaustion. When we arrived, the villagers who stayed behind cheered loudly at the sight of the carts. The women helped unload the heavy grain sacks, and the children danced around the colorful silks and sparkling jewelry. With these abundant supplies, our group gained the resources and confidence we needed to survive the long journey ahead. The village chief gathered several clan elders, along with Chen Hai and Ye Hai, to count our newly acquired supplies. Chen Hai meticulously listed everything on a large stone in the center of the camp, drawing a curious crowd. The village chief loudly announced that the distribution would be strictly based on merit. Grain and money would be handed out immediately, while the jewelry, silk, and weapons would be kept safe in carriages to be sold or exchanged later in town. Chang Wu and the villagers all agreed that this arrangement was completely fair. When the clan elders evaluated the contributions, they determined that I deserved the most credit for leading the charge and killing the highest number of mountain bandits. The crowd fully supported this decision. My share was immense. 3 bags of rice, 2 bags of wheat, 5 bags of brown rice, 10 caddies of cured meat, a basket of dried goods, over 150 taels of silver, and 600 copper coins. Ye Zhang and Ye He helped carry the heavy load to my donkey cart. I quietly secured the money and grain into my spatial storage, replacing the visible bags with lightweight fodder to keep my secret safe. The remaining distribution proceeded smoothly. Villagers happily received their shares, and the sturdy young men on duty were handed the sharpest confiscated weapons to strengthen our defenses. After a quick meal, the exhausted villagers lay down to rest. The village chief and Chang Wu decided we would recover for half a day and resume our journey in the afternoon. My 3 daughters fell asleep in the carriage, and I leaned against the front of the cart to rest my eyes. Suddenly, a faint argument from the west side of the camp woke me. I opened my eyes and saw a villager named Yi Hu and 2 other young men aggressively confronting Yi Hai. Yi Hu was furious, demanding to know why he only received 1 bag of brown rice while others got far better grain. He accused Yi Hai of favoritism and tried to snatch the register. Yi Hai firmly protected the records, explaining that the shares perfectly matched the rules established by everyone. As the commotion drew a larger crowd, Yi Hu stubbornly pushed Ye Hai, nearly knocking him down. Just then, a cold, powerful shout silenced the area. The village chief walked over, helped Yi Hai up, and confronted the troublemaker. Yi Hu tried to defend his complaints, but the village chief looked at him with sharp, knowing eyes. He calmly exposed Yi Hu, asking him directly where he was during the actual fighting, reminding everyone that he had hid behind a tree during the ambush and slacked off while moving supplies from the stronghold. The village chief confronted Yi Hu directly, exposing his cowardice and laziness. Other villagers chimed in, confirming that Yi Hu had dodged the fighting and slacked off while moving supplies. Pale and trembling, Ye Hu could no longer defend himself. The village chief firmly stated that our rewards are strictly based on merit, to protect those who actually risk their lives. He gave Ye Hu a harsh choice: accept the rules, face the confiscation of his supplies, or be expelled from the group entirely. Terrified, Yi Hu and his companions quickly bowed their heads, admitted their mistakes, and begged to stay. The village chief warned everyone that as refugees we must stay united to survive. Chang Wu arrived shortly after, backing the village chief completely and declaring that any further discord among the escort agency or the villagers would be dealt with severely. The crowd dispersed in an orderly manner, but the mood in the camp shifted from simple joy to a serious respect for authority. Watching them leave, I realized that getting supplies was just the first step. Without strict discipline, internal strife would eventually destroy us. I approached the village chief and Chang Wu, suggesting a thorough overhaul of our organization. I proposed establishing clear, transparent rules for watch duties, combat order, and resource distribution, complete with a strict reward and punishment system. I also suggested appointing reliable supervisors like Ye Hai for registrations, backed by trusted clan elders to prevent any favoritism. Furthermore, I recommended restructuring our young men based on their actual performance in the recent battle to ensure the hard workers are rewarded and the lazy are kept in check. The village chief and Chang Wu strongly agreed with my plan. We decided to gather the elders and young men before setting off in the afternoon to finalize and publicly announce these regulations. Chang Wu also promised to assign reliable escorts to help enforce them. By noon, the camp woke up to a much more disciplined atmosphere. After lunch, the village chief and Chang Wu gathered everyone to announce the new rules, while Chang Wu and I stood by to provide clarity. With our supplies secure, our forces properly reorganized, and clear rules in place, I felt much more confident that we could endure the hardships ahead and successfully find a safe home. The village chief publicly announced our new team rules, covering everything from duty responsibilities to resource distribution. Everyone accepted them without objection. Reliable elders and escorts were appointed to supervise the rosters, and weapons were handed out to the young men on duty. Half an hour later, our caravan set off in an orderly fashion. I drove my donkey cart at the rear as we entered Blackstone Pass. The canyon was narrow and treacherous, with steep cliffs on both sides, but since we had already eliminated the mountain bandits, we passed through safely in about 15 minutes. After walking for another hour, we arrived at an abandoned post station just as the sun was setting. Chang Wu and his escorts searched the rooms to ensure there were no hidden hazards before letting everyone settle down. A clean well was discovered in the backyard, prompting the women and children to fetch water while the men built makeshift cooking stoves. I carried 2 buckets of clear water back to our cart. My oldest daughter, Ye Wanqing, built our stove, while the younger 2 gathered firewood. They prepared rice and wild vegetables mixed with cured meat. To give them a real treat, I secretly pulled a roasted wild rabbit, a bowl of pork rib soup, and some dipping sauce from my spatial storage. My daughters were thrilled, remarking that this meal was even better than what we had during the New Year. Once the children fell asleep, I joined the village chief and Chang Wu by the fire to discuss our plans. The chief noted that we should reach the next town by midday tomorrow, where we can sell the captured jewelry and silk for silver to buy medicine and fabric. He asked me to personally monitor the procession's discipline along the way. Chang Wu confirmed that the night watch was fully arranged with armed young men and escorts to guard against wild animals. After our meeting, I returned to the donkey cart. Seeing my 3 daughters fast asleep, I leaned against the carriage and closed my eyes to rest, keeping my ears open to the quiet night. As night deepened, wolf howls echoed from the distant mountains, keeping the guards on high alert. Although my eyes were closed, my hand remained on my sword hilt until dawn. Once the morning light broke, the women prepared breakfast, and Chang Wu gathered everyone to move out. Our caravan left the post station in an orderly fashion, aiming to reach the next town before noon. As we traveled along the official road, the rugged mountain terrain gave way to a vast open plain. My 3 daughters leaned out of the carriage, marveled by the massive grassland. Growing up in the mountains, they had never seen such a wide plain. The flat road allowed us to move much faster than the day before. By midday, a grayish-brown city wall appeared on the horizon. Chang Wu rode ahead and reminded everyone to hide their weapons and stay alert. I placed my broadsword into my spatial storage and focused on the city gate ahead. The city wall featured a plaque with the 3 large characters Pingkang County. Chang Wu and the village chief approached the 2 guards at the gate, explaining that we were migrant refugees from Liangzhou accompanied by the Changyuan escort agency. The guards allowed us entry but strictly ordered us to leave before dark and avoid causing any trouble. When the village chief asked if the county could resettle us, the guard explained that the local resettlement sites were already completely full due to the massive influx of refugees. He suggested we head to the prefecture city to ask for slots. Though disappointed, the village chief directed the caravan to enter the city in order. The bluestone streets were wide, clean, and filled with bustling shops. Driving my donkey cart at the back, I kept a close eye on the crowds, knowing that our refugee identity made us highly vulnerable. Changwu noticed the village chief's worry and kindly offered to temporarily house our elderly, women, and children at the Chongyuan Escort Agency branch in Jingzhou Prefecture. He suggested our strong young men could build temporary sheds until we secured official slots. Just as the village chief was about to respond, a voice from behind interrupted their conversation. Chen Hai stepped out from the group and offered his family manor on the outskirts of the prefecture city for everyone to stay. He also promised to use his connections to help us secure official resettlement places or temporary residence permits. The village chief was overjoyed and thanked him deeply. We then moved to a shady open space in the city to rest. The village chief approached me and whispered that I, Ye Jiang, and Chen Hai should go with Chang Wu and his escorts to exchange the captured jewelry and silks for silver. He advised against selling the items we got back in Liangzhou yet, so as not to attract unwanted attention. We packed the valuables into large bundles and set off on high alert. Chang Wu led us directly to the city's largest pawn shop, Jubao Pavilion, which was known for fair pricing. The shop assistant immediately showed us into a private room in the backyard, and the manager arrived shortly after. When Chang Wu opened the packages, the high-quality brocades, pearls, and gold ornaments lit up the room. Chang Wu quoted a very professional and fair price. The manager agreed, but noted he needed some time to draw the massive amount of funds from the storeroom. I sat quietly by the side, scanning the windows and doors while keeping my hand resting on my waist, staying ready for any foul play. Fortunately, the transaction went smoothly. Half an hour later, the manager returned with 4 heavy wooden boxes containing 3,200 taels of silver. He offered to issue silver notes instead, but Chang Wu declined, opting for the physical coins after our young men verified the full amount. We guarded the chests heavily on our way back to the camp, warding off any greedy onlookers with our cold, intimidating presence. Back at the settlement, the village chief safely locked the silver away and announced that we would distribute it once we left the city. Soon after, everyone finished their shopping, and we marched out of the south gate of Pingchang County. By dusk, Chang Wu found a sheltered slope for our camp. I parked my donkey cart, helped Yi Wanqing start the fire, and took out some dried meat from my spatial storage for my daughters. After dinner, the village chief gathered everyone around the fire to distribute the silver based on the merit book. I received the largest share, getting over 200 taels. I silently stored the money away, feeling much more secure about our future. After the village chief reminded us of the 2-shift watch rules, everyone went to rest. I was assigned to the second half of the night, so I leaned against a tree trunk to rest my eyes, remaining fully alert to the distant sounds of the wilderness. After a simple morning meal, we packed up our camp and continued our journey. The next 2 days were spent traveling steadily along the official road. The scenery gradually changed from open meadows to organized fields and villages, and the road grew increasingly crowded with pedestrians and other migrating refugees. By the evening of the 5th day, the massive, robust city walls of Jingzhou Prefecture finally appeared on the horizon. Chang Wu shouted the good news from the front, instantly lifting everyone's spirits. My 3 daughters clung to the carriage curtain, looking at the towering gate with sparkling eyes. I looked at the thick gray walls and let out a long sigh of relief. After a grueling journey, we had finally reached our destination. As we approached the city gate, a middle-aged steward accompanied by several servants rushed forward out of the crowd. He bowed deeply to Chen Hai, announcing that he had received Chen Hai's letter 2 days prior and had successfully prepared everything at their suburban manor. The houses were clean, and hot water and food were ready for the entire village. Chen Hai instructed the steward to take good care of us and told his son, Chen Wensong, to help guide the group. He then turned to the village chief, explaining that he needed to enter the city first to contact friends and secure our resettlement permits. He promised to meet us at the manor in a couple of days. The village chief thanked him deeply, and my daughters said a warm goodbye to Madame Huang before the Chen family went into the city. Right after, Chang Wu rode over to say goodbye to the village chief and me, noting that it was time for the escort agency to head home. The villagers gathered around to express their gratitude, feeling a deep bond after surviving so many trials together. As Chang Wu turned to leave, he suddenly stopped, dismounted, and walked over to hand me a custom wooden plaque from the Changwen escort agency. He told me in a deep voice that if I ever encountered trouble in Jingzhou Prefecture, I could bring this plaque to their city branch, and he would do everything in his power to help. I took the rough plaque, thanked him, and wished him well before he galloped into the city. With our goodbyes finished, the steward and Chen Wensong led our caravan toward the suburban manor, which was only a half-hour walk away. Bringing up the rear with my donkey cart, I finally let down my guard after days of constant tension. My 3 daughters remained at the curtain, eagerly whispering about their anticipation for our new temporary home. We followed Steward Lee down a quiet side road into the outskirts of the city. Leaving the busy official road behind soon, Chen Wensong pointed out his family estate ahead. The property was clean, enclosed by a neat bamboo fence and lit by oil paper lanterns at the open main gate. Several local estate workers rushed out to welcome us with warm smiles, eagerly helping us pull our carts and unload our goods. Steward Lee announced that accommodations were fully prepared. The east courtyard was reserved for the elderly, women, and children, while the west courtyard housed the strong young men. I drove my donkey cart into the central courtyard and looked around. The estate was well managed, complete with neatly arranged rooms, a livestock shed, and active chicken and duck coops in the backyard. My 3 daughters were thrilled with their window room in the east courtyard, which featured clean, comfortable bedding and fresh tea. After a long journey of sleeping in the open, they were overjoyed to have real beds. I parked the donkey cart near the livestock shed, where the village chief approached me with a relieved smile. We agreed that while the estate was a safe temporary haven, we needed to secure official resettlement slots soon to rebuild our true homes. In the meantime, I agreed that our young men should help the estate workers tend the fields tomorrow as a token of gratitude. Back in the room, I gave my daughters some dried fruit and pastries from my spatial storage to enjoy while waiting for dinner. We later gathered in the main kitchen, where the estate workers served a hearty meal of rich meat soup, steamed brown rice, and fresh green vegetables. Sitting at the stone tables, the exhausted villagers finally relaxed. Chen Wensong kindly served meat soup to my daughters, reminding them to nourish themselves. Ye Wanqing thanked him warmly, and Chen Wensong humbly replied that our village had saved his family from starvation on the road, making them the truly grateful ones. As night fell, the village grew quiet. Following the village chief's orders, our young men joined the estate workers to form a vigilant night watch, armed with hoes and sickles. I walked out into the moonlit courtyard, where Steward Lee carrying a lantern assured me that their guard rotation and perimeter traps would keep us perfectly safe. I returned to the east courtyard, blew out the oil lamp, and went to bed. Listening to the steady breathing of my daughters, I fell into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, the sound of roosters crowing and dogs barking woke me. Stepping outside into the bright morning light, I saw the farmers already heading out to the fields with their hoes, while breakfast smoke rose gracefully from the kitchen. I walked slowly along the courtyard past the livestock shed, checking on my donkey. Looking out at the surrounding fields, I noticed the rice stalks growing vigorously under the morning dew. Steward Lee approached me with a bucket of water and told me breakfast was ready. I mentioned that the village chief wanted our young men to help out in the fields this morning, but Steward Lee quickly insisted that we rest as we were his master's saviors. In the kitchen, my 3 daughters were already eating. Ye Wanqing ladled a warm bowl of mixed grain porridge for me. As I ate, I kept a close eye on the manor entrance, hoping for news about our resettlement. I decided to head into the city to check the official government policies and learn the layout of the town. The village chief and the elders fully supported my plan, reminding me to stay cautious on the road. I told my daughters to stay inside the village while I was gone. As I prepared the donkey cart, Chen Wensong ran over and asked to join me so he could visit his family home. During our ride, Chen Wensong eagerly shared details about the city's markets and layout. Half an hour later, the majestic city walls of Jingzhou Prefecture came into view. The main gate was packed with carriages and bustling crowds. The guards conducted a thorough inspection, but seeing my composed demeanor and Chen Wensong's respectable appearance, they let us pass without any trouble. Inside the city, the bluestone streets were wide and clean, packed with shops and food stalls. Chen Wensong guided me toward the government office, where a large crowd had gathered around official notices. We parked the cart and squeezed to the front. The notice stated that all local resettlement sites were completely saturated, meaning the prefecture would not add new slots for now. Temporary residence documents would only be granted to refugees who possessed their original identity records and could prove a legitimate local livelihood. Everyone else was advised to look for placement in surrounding prefectures. While our village had carefully preserved our original household documents, we had no official way to prove a local livelihood yet. Besides, temporary permits would not allow us to farm or build permanent homes. Chen Wensong noted that securing a permanent household transfer under these strict rules would likely require his father to use his local connections. I nodded slowly, realizing that finding a true home in Jingzhou would be a complex challenge.